Baynard Woods is a senior editor at City Paper. His work has appeared or is forthcoming in McSweeney's, The Believer, the Georgia Review, The Millions, and the Rumpus. He's the author of Coffin Point, The Strange Cases of Ed McTeer, Witchdoctor Sheriff, and he plays in the rock and roll band, the Barnyard Sharks. And he's actually played here. So here, Baynard, he's also going to play the banjo.
Yeah, I hope y'all don't mind if there's a little bit of, I'm just going to use the banjo as a sort of to punctuate things, give you a moment to digest and stuff. Oh yeah, I couldn't find my wire cutters. You know. One of the treacheries of banjo playing. So it's actually really interesting there. You'll notice a lot of thematic and certainly in terms of setting similarities with or parallels with Robert's book. So I was really excited about building some harmonies with these two things. It was time to summon Ed McTeer. First, caretakers found voodoo dolls and strips of paper and branches hanging over a grave in the Rhett Cemetery in Beaufort County, South Carolina. Then, the dead man's family noticed the dirt on his plot had been disturbed and called the authorities. The circuit court judge finally ordered the body exhumed, but the cemetery's manager said the body didn't need to be exhumed. The grave was open, period. When investigators unlatched the coffin, they found the man's body lying there, but only his body. The head was missing. Sheriff Morgan McCutcheon called it the most bizarre damn case he'd ever seen. It was 1979 and McCutcheon, a former Marine, was trying to modernize the department. This lunatic business was the last thing he needed. What was he supposed to do with this hoodoo? There was only one thing he could do. Call the old sheriff, Ed McTeer, retired for 16 years now. McTeer, a legend, was not only an expert on root work and witchcraft, he was a witch doctor himself. Root work, also called hoodoo, voodoo, and witchcraft, traveled with the African slaves to the low country of South Carolina. McTeer, a white man, began presenting himself as a root doctor early in his long career. By the 1970s, he even had an office where he practiced as a poor man's psychiatrist. Everybody had heard stories from the days when McTeer would send out word and the suspect would turn himself in saying, "Lock me up, Sheriff, just don't do to me what you did to Dr. Buzzard." Dr. Buzzard, whose real name was Stephanie Robinson, was the acknowledged king of the low country root doctors. Robinson had been handing out potions, which equaled practicing medicine without a license in McTeer's book, but the sheriff could never catch Dr. Buzzard. Whenever McTeer found a witness, Buzzard came into the station, flashed his fancy clothes, his blue shades, and his crooked grin. He fixed the witness with the evil eye. The witness started twitching and shaking, and either refused to talk or changed his testimony. Back then, everybody in Beaufort knew that snitches on witches got twitches. Young Ed McTeer was fed up. If he couldn't defeat Dr. Buzzard within the boundaries of the law, he'd extend his jurisdiction to the spiritual realm. He began removing roots or hexes from people in the county. Word began to spread about McTeer. They said he practiced white witchcraft, and they called him the White Prince. He challenged the root doctor's authority on their own turf. And why not? They were on his turf all the time, chewing roots in the courthouse, trying to affect rulings. Dr. Buzzard declared war, making a public statement. He was going to bring down Sheriff McTeer. "Tell Buzzard trouble is close to him," McTeer responded. "I don't like to be threatened." A short time later, Dr. Buzzard's son was driving home to St. Helena's in a hotshot car. Rain beat off the windshield, lightning flashed, the roads were unpaved, the headlights dim, and the marshes beyond were flooding. Something caused Robinson's son to drive off the causeway. The vehicle sank into the marsh, and young Robinson drowned. Admittedly, the young man drank. He'd wrecked cars before, but in the popular imagination, McTeer's magic caused young Robinson's crash. McTeer did not discourage the impression. In one of his memoirs, McTeer wrote about coming home to find Dr. Buzzard in his driveway a short time after the wreck. Dr. Buzzard observed they both had the power. He wanted to teach McTeer the things he'd learned from his father. He agreed to quit distributing medicine and confine his business to spiritual matters. McTeer, in turn, promised to give up black witchcraft. He agreed to focus on using white witchcraft to help people. Being accepted as a root doctor gave him the status necessary to unite the legal and spiritual authorities in Beaufort County for the next 15 years. At least that's the legend. And after Dr. Buzzard died, there was no one left to contradict it. McTeer, the white sheriff, was free to call himself the last remaining tie with the true African witch doctors of the Low Country. McCutcheon and his investigator must have thought of all of this as they stood looking at the beheaded corpse, strips of paper. Sorry. Sorry about that. As they stood looking at the beheaded corpse, the strips of paper, and the voodoo dolls. If anybody could help make sense of all of this, it was McTeer. Of course, they're aware how Ed McTeer loved publicity. It'd be hard to keep him from talking to the press, and the papers were already going crazy. After his initial remarks, McCutcheon respected the family's wishes and refused to discuss the case at all. But sure enough, McTeer made numerous statements. By this time, he was a creepy old guy with thick glasses, long white hair, and tremendous ears hanging down from his skeletal head. His picture, holding voodoo dolls or amulets, was plastered across half the papers in the state, with a big headline proclaiming Low Country Voodoo. McTeer told the Beaufort Gazette the perpetrators went in beforehand and hung things in the trees to curse people. When that first phase did not prove successful, they came back and did the final thing, trying to put a spell on these people. They wanted to make people sick and finally to kill them. He added, "This is a true case of black magic. The head, they could use that to put a spell on people they're trying to kill. Bury it somewhere." He went on to say, "It's the kind of unusual to take parts from a body around here. There must have been a great deal of money involved." A week later, on December 29th, 1979, Ed McTeer died. Natural causes, undetermined. An old friend asked that the sheriff's office guard McTeer's corpse until it was finally interred. Any part of his body could be extremely valuable to a voodoo practitioner, the concerned friend told McCutcheon. Finally, McTeer was buried in the cemetery of St. Helena Episcopal Church in downtown Beaufort, only a couple of blocks from the voodoo shrine in the back room of his real estate office on West Street. Now that was the prologue, and we're jumping back to the epilogue, which ends the same story. The case of the beheaded corpse was never solved. And that's not a cold case we're about to reopen, said Neil Baxley of the current sheriff's office. I came to think about the case again when I met Stephanie Robinson's grandson, whom I'll call Dr. B. He used his name, but I will not. Root doctors are not like psychics with bright signs set up on the side of the road. It's kind of a secret society. You have to be introduced, said Grace Cordial of the Beaufort County Library. Roger Pinckney had introduced me, and I set up an appointment. Dr. B told me where to go, and it was the same plantation Stephanie Robinson had lived on. Buzzy was Dr. Buzzard's chosen successor. He'd married the great root doctor's daughter, but was not Buzzard's kin. Dr. B was. I turned off Highway 21. It was high tide and the marsh stretched out around the road, spiked with spooky old oaks. The sky was still, the spring day sharp. I noticed a woman standing beside the road in all white. She was staring off at the water rustling with cord grass in the wind. She did not turn to look at me. The wind fluttered through her robes, a searing brightness against the flaxen ground. She looked like a ghost. I saw the buzzards circling over the place where I was headed. As instructed, I pulled up in front of the 2 gray outbuildings and called Dr. B from my cell phone. A man got off a blue tractor in the distance. A moment later, he walked out from between the 2 buildings. One of them had broken windows and an old school desk inside. We shook hands. He was a tremendous man with a bald head that was twice as large as my own. His face was fleshy, his eyes set deep. We walked around the first building and stood at the door of the second, marked by a sign that bore his name. He opened it and motioned me in. When I entered, it smelled of incense and baby powder. It's dark, he said, his voice deep and heavy, but it will get lighter. I wasn't sure I believed him. He gestured towards the couch. I sat down. What's bothering you? Bad luck? Pains? I'm writing about Ed McTeer, I said, and I'm a little worried. It's kind of like bringing someone back from the dead when you write about them. And your grandfather, I don't want to offend any spirits or anything. He laughed. Then he told me a root would cost $300. I'll prepare it for you, and then you really shouldn't even let anyone else touch it. You might not know who your enemies are. They could neutralize it. I'm sorry, I said, but whatever else I may be afraid of, I'm more afraid of my wife if I spend $300 in the middle of a recession. I understand, he said, smiling. Then he gave me the root I was really after and started to talk about Ed McTeer. Sheriff McTeer said he defeated my grandfather. He talked about a lot of things he didn't know anything about. When that body got beheaded, they came around, they talked to everybody, asking what it was about. Nobody said anything except for Mr. McTeer. He died the next day, the very next day. He talked about things you don't talk about. I thanked him and I got up to leave. He gave me 2 business cards. He opened the door, but we paused there on the threshold. A triangle of sun shone on our feet. Don't worry, Dr. B assured me. You can't reveal anything that would hurt you. His words hung in an ominous silence before he added, you'll never know enough. Thanks a lot, y'all.